All right. Today we're going to hit a subject that's really misunderstood by people who go to church, people who can call themselves Christians, and people who do not. Um, One of the most quoted verses in the Bible is people say, judge not. So, and it's a new phrase. It's kind of a funny phrase. I've heard people say, just joking with each other. They'll tell each other to friends. They'll say, don't judge me, just joking with each other. Um, anyway, are Christians supposed to judge each other or other people? Well, every person, no matter who they are, no exceptions, are always judging each other all the time. We judge each other constantly. Everyone does. You've judged me already. In the first couple seconds, you've looked at my video, probably before you played it, but at least within the first couple seconds of watching me talk, you've already judged me. You've taken an idea of what you think I'm like, my personality, maybe my intelligence. um, but you've judged me already. It's just natural. We all judge each other. Let's look at Romans chapter 2. And, just let's go. Let me finish my thought real quick. Who are we supposed to judge? As believers, we're supposed to judge other believers. If I'm a believer and you're a believer, and you see I'm doing something wrong, you're supposed to come talk to me about it. That's the idea. Talk to me about it, point it out to me, say I'm doing something wrong, and try to get me to stop doing what's wrong. For many reasons, for my own sake and for the sake of God. Because I'm being a horrible testimony if I'm doing open sin. It's hurting God's testimony, and I'm hurting myself because God will punish me to get me straightened back out. Or I can have a believer come to me and say, hey, you're doing something wrong, with the idea of trying to help me. The idea of judging another believer is not because they're offending you. I'm not supposed to go to somebody and say, you know, what you're doing really bothers me and you need to stop. That's selfish, and that's not the purpose of judging each other. The purpose of judging another Christian or believer, I like to call them, is to help them. Should we be judging people that we consider unbelievers, people who we consider people who do not believe in God, don't care about God, don't go to church, or just don't care, just have no thoughts toward God? No, God judges them. We can judge their actions, and by someone's actions, you can say, well, I think they're an unbeliever. I think they're not a Christian. That's fine, and we do judge all the time. Unbelievers are judging us all the time. People who don't believe like we do are looking at us and judging us. Because that person says they're a Christian, or they kind of act religious, they might say. I don't like that word, but they might say they look religious or act religious, and they'll judge you and watch you to see if you actually act like you're supposed to, like in their mind, what you're supposed to do. And if you don't, then they say you're a hypocrite. And let's look at what the Bible has to say about it. Let's go to Romans chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. Let's not take it out of context, though. The verse continues, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself, for thou that judgest doest the same things. And what is the word we call that? A hypocrite. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we'll get into that in a minute. It's not saying don't judge. It's just saying how you judge people is how you're going to be judged also. Not just by other people, but by God. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. So if you're a hypocrite and you're judging people for doing something, but you're doing the same thing, God will judge you, which is a much worse thing than a person judging you. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest a thing, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? That's a rhetorical question. You will not escape. Romans 2, 14 and 15. For when the Gentiles just means anyone who's not a Jew, which have not the law, The law meaning the law of Moses. The Jews were given the law of Moses by God as a nation, as a people. The Gentiles were not. The Gentiles were supposed to learn from the Jews about God by learning about the law. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, so it's they don't have the law, they don't know it, they've never been taught it, but they can still do the law. These, having not the law, are a law unto themselves. So does that mean everyone just does what they think is right? No. Which show the work of the law written in their hearts. So God's given us a conscience and told us that's how we're made. We know what's right and wrong. At least we do at one point. Some people get their conscience seared, the Bible says, where they no longer care about anything and have no thoughts. Their conscience is gone. But your conscience does tell you when you're doing something wrong. Even people who never heard about Jesus, don't have a Bible, and here in America, there's many people who know nothing about God, don't know verses, don't know biblical ideas, don't know much about Jesus or God. They still have guilt. They feel bad when they do something they're not supposed to. Like I said, until they get to a point where they just don't care anymore. But there is a guiltiness that stays with you that doesn't go away, that you feel. Okay, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts, and meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. So there it is. It's completely natural for us to accuse or excuse one another. So we're always accusing each other and looking at people and judging them. Let's take an extreme example. If you went to a prison, what do you know as general public here? We know people in prisons, even that are murderers, rapists, thieves, robbers, people who beat people up and hurt people, violent. They judge each other. The bottom of the totem pole in a prison is a child molester. A murderer will look at somebody and say, well, yeah, I killed that guy for money or for a drug deal went bad. But they look down on the child molester. So see, they're judging somebody else. So people are always judging each other, no matter what. So let's go to Luke chapter 6. Oops, lost my spot. Luke chapter 6, verse 41 and 42. And this is how you judge, something you should do first. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye? It's like a splinter. But perceiveth not the beam that is in thine own eye. So how are you going to help somebody and judge somebody and say, hey, you've got a splinter in your eye and you got a whole beam, which is a gigantic long board sticking in your eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, brother, let me pull out thy mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? And what do we call those people? God names it right here. Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. That's a perfect example of being a hypocrite. Someone who may go to church or calls themselves a Christian and sees some flaw in somebody else, because a lot of us, let's not kid ourselves, are very judgmental, especially people that I've met that go to church all the time. They consider themselves, not all of them, but some consider themselves better than other people, or they consider themselves better than people who just go occasionally. They don't know those people's circumstances, and they also don't know what they think biblically. That's judging, and it's fine to judge, but you should get the facts. So what's the problem with judging like this is we're judging somebody who's got a small problem, but we've got a much bigger problem. We don't even notice it, and we're trying to judge somebody else and supposedly help them out, but we've got a gigantic sinful problem in our life that we're ignoring. You can't help somebody else till you judge yourself first. So number one in judging is judge yourself first. Let's go to Galatians. Almost done. Galatians 6. Here's the purpose of judging another Christian. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, which means people who are believers, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness. Meekness being humble. Don't go to them and say, you have offended me, and be arrogant. You go to them with the idea of you want to help them. Considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. So that's pretty important. That's the purpose of judging somebody else as a Christian, is to help them get right with God, and to do what's right again, and to stop sinning and stop being a bad testimony to God. It also helps that person so they don't become judged by God and punished by God, to get the person to stop doing that sin. That's the idea, to do it because you love them, not because they've offended you or they bother you for some reason. I don't worry about judging unbelievers. That's God's problem. God will deal with them. What we want is we want them to become believers, so they don't get judged by God and go to hell. That's the problem. A lot of times we look at people we work with, or people we've known, or we see in the street, or we hear about, and we think, whoa, they're sinning, or they're doing something that's wrong, and it bothers me. Don't let that bother you. I say to my children, I don't try to get people that I consider unbelievers to stop sinning. That doesn't make them a believer. That doesn't help them get to heaven. That doesn't help them get eternal life. What you do is you try to teach them about God so they can become a believer, and then they'll stop sinning. That's all you need to do. So as Christians, judge each other, but judge yourself first. And that's the proper way to do it.